Back at his base at the University of Chicago, Professor Paul Serino and 3 of his team of dinosaur hunters, Hans Larsen, Jeff Wilson, and Chris Seiger, have the complex task of preparing the fossils from their second discovery, the huge skull that came out of the desert with more than 400 pieces. But before they can be reassembled, each fragment must be cleaned and the delicate fossil bones separated from the hard sandstone that surrounds it.
I'd go in the room and I would say, this is the last piece I'm going to fit today. And 4 hours later I would walk out, or 7 hours later I would walk out feeling absolutely thrilled that I'd fit one per half hour. We slowly began to realize that with hours of time in this case, because there were lots of small little pieces that each had a unique edge, or more than 1,000 different edges to compare it to, and that slowly but surely the pieces were becoming bigger, and that likely nearly all those pieces belonged to the skull. It was a question of the patience to put them together.
2.5 months later, their jigsaw puzzle is complete. And now, for the first time, the team can fully appreciate this beast's gigantic proportions. Its skull measures a full 1.5 meters long, with 15-centimeter blade-like teeth. Serino has discovered an African dinosaur whose skull suggests it could be even larger than T-Rex. As with the skeleton of Deltadromeus, a full resin cast of the skull will be made for public exhibition. This time, the newly unearthed creature travels to Toronto, where Serino and his team will work on the reconstruction. Model maker Jay McLennan is in charge of creating the replica of the enormous skull.
Let one dry. Jay is a technical wizard and as well as a sculptor in his own right. What he did to the skull was, of course, make an intricate and truly marvelous shell around the model that we had built, so that we could then create in a single piece of plastic what we thought the skull would look like.
Once the cast is complete, artist Garfield Minot begins the painstaking task of actually putting flesh on the bones of the skull. His will be the vision of the living, breathing work of art. Modeling clay is applied layer by layer. Garfield and Paul work together to recreate a life-size bust of this awesome beast. Serino helps Garfield accurately reproduce details of the dinosaur's anatomy, especially the size of its muscles and where they attach to the bone. For Garfield, recreating the dinosaur's skin presents a unique challenge.
You have to have a very good background in anatomy, biology. I get a lot of references from all kinds of things. I go to the zoo sometimes and look at animals, take pictures.
90 million years ago, this enormous predator would have been one of the most feared, most ferocious beasts to roam this prehistoric landscape. It would lie in wait, its dappled skin a good camouflage in the patchy sunlight of the forest, then hurl itself at its prey in a frenzy of jaws and pounding limbs.
I wouldn't want it as a pet. It'd be lunch. I'd definitely look at it as a really vicious carnivorous animal. It's kind of like a shark on land.
The huge predatory skull clears up a mystery that puzzled some of the first explorers of the Sahara. During the early part of this century, French and German paleontologists discovered bones and saber-shaped teeth in the Sahara and gave their mysterious creature the name Carcharodontosaurus saharicus, shark-toothed reptile from the Sahara. Its body would have been stocky, its neck stout for wheeling around the massive skull. Unlike Deltadromeus, it was not swift. Rather, it would have ambushed its prey and gulped it down whole. In Morocco, Paul Serino and his team of students worked hard collecting information that would reconstruct the environment their dinosaurs roamed. They collected bags of rock and sediment to search for microfossils. Two of the team, Didier Dutaille and Gabriel Lyon, then cleaned and sorted this material in the field, an arduous task. They found crabs, fish, sharks and salamanders that shared these river deltas with dinosaurs millions of years ago. Every piece of evidence is vital, from the smallest fossils to anatomical details of the dinosaur itself. Computer programs reveal how these recently found creatures from Africa relate to dinosaurs on neighboring continents 90 million years ago in the late Cretaceous period.
All these are telling you clues about where this animal fits in. If you have the energy to solve the mystery of the anatomy. And so what that takes is the careful detective work of comparing and listing all those features and those of its relatives until a pattern emerges that links this dinosaur with its closest relatives.
The team worked closely with artist Karol Ambroginskas, who created detailed ink drawings of the two new dinosaurs.
I'm going to shade away from that. You get that pretty well.
In addition, for building models for public display, their findings will be presented in scientific journals.
So much of what we do depends on communicating our science to other scientists and to the public.
Once reassembled, the creatures would shed new light on the overall dinosaur family tree. Paul now had hard evidence that although both his discoveries evolved in isolation, ancestors of these African dinosaurs once roamed many neighboring continents.
The skeleton of Deltadromeus represent the first relatively complete skull and skeleton we have from the late Cretaceous, a period of 30 or 40 million years in Africa. When you have that situation, every find is going to tell you a lot. And what this is beginning to tell us is that Africa had sort of moved off on its own, but that many dinosaur groups, maybe even more than we had previously suspected, had spread worldwide before these continents departed on their own evolutionary pathways.
It was only once the team got the skull home that they began to appreciate the significance of their discovery. They had found probably the largest predatory dinosaur in the world. Now is the moment of their public triumph. Bones that 1 year ago were buried deep in the sands of the Sahara Desert have come back to life as vivid, lifelike reminders of that long-lost world. Paul and his team returned from the Sahara with 2 brand new dinosaurs and a broader understanding of dinosaur evolution on the African continent. It took a team from 3 countries the better part of 1 year to unearth, transport, then recreate these never-before-seen dinosaurs. They joined forces to put flesh on the bones of some of the most magnificent creatures ever to walk the earth. There is, however, another way of putting flesh onto fossils. These hunters are part of a scientific mission that, if successful, could bring back the lost world of the dinosaurs. They are searching for the ultimate fossils. Creatures that died millions of years ago and yet survive intact, preserved in amber. Amber is nature's undertaker. The animals, plants, and insects it entombs provide a unique snapshot of life millions of years ago. Amber is also in great demand for its beauty and expensive because of its rarity. Only 20 locations around the world produce amber. This is one of them, the Dominican Republic on the Caribbean island of Hispaniola. Amber was already prized by the natives when Spanish explorers arrived here 500 years ago. Today, the bustling markets and streets of Santo Domingo, the island's capital, harbour a brisk trade in this fossil gold. Tourists by the thousands flock to traders in search of cheap amber jewellery and fossil curios. The island also attracts professional amber hunters, like Roy Larimer. Once a diamond dealer, he has moved into amber in a big way. It is in great demand for jewellery, but also for science. Amber hunting is high-stakes paleontology. Roy is tracking down new fossils that reveal amazing discoveries about life millions of years ago. This cockroach is 20 million years old. The amber preserved what it ate, the genetic code in its cells, and the atmosphere it lived in. Amber's tiny bubbles could even contain the air the dinosaurs breathed 65 million years ago.
Hey, Jorge.
Hey, Roy.
How you doing?
Hey, man. Good.
Roy buys over 40,000 pieces of amber a year from dealers like Jorge Caridad. But before he buys, he has to examine every piece carefully.
You see this?
I'm looking for a good price on a few. Let me pick out a couple here. It's a bit of a gamble when buying the amber because you never know what you're going to find inside. Certain pieces will yield insect and fossil material, and certain pieces may come up barren or sterile. An exceptional piece of amber can sell for as much as $25,000 to $30,000, depending on what's in it. Vertebrates like lizards and frogs are certainly those types of pieces that do seem to fetch that kind of money. What do you need to get for this little group here?
For the price?
Yeah.
Give me 2,000 each piece.
That's a fair
Very
price.
good pieces.
That's a very fair price. We got a deal.
The rarest and most prized amber is blue. A chunk like this can sell for $2,000. But when Roy scours the market, he is less concerned with the colour than what the amber contains.
¿Posible? Bien, bien. Ahora. Ahora.
To get the best deal, Roy buys in bulk. A single fossil may be worth more than all the rest put together. This game of bluff and double bluff requires a cool head and a poker face. Roy's competitors are private collectors. To beat them to the best fossils, Roy and geologist Manuel Esralde Binet go in search of the source.
The rocks that form the valley, they are sandstone. You see that the landscape is very peculiar. And then when you see it on the top of the hill.
It takes at least 1 million years to create a piece of amber. 20 million years ago, before these mountains existed, huge forests covered the low-lying island of Hispaniola. A now extinct species of Hymenaea tree thrived here, producing large flows of resin, which eventually hardened. Resin is nature's way of protecting trees from attack by burrowing insects and animals. It is highly effective. In seconds, it traps its victims and kills them. When the trees died, they were washed into rivers, and the slow process of fossilization began. After the resin sank to the bottom, silt and mud buried it. After millions of years, layer after layer was compressed until immense pressures hardened the resin into amber. Later, the continents collided, pushing and buckling the shores into mountains. Today, Roy and Manuel